Lynn Van Art, and I have three special guests today to share about the lemur research they're doing and for the World Lemur Festival. So we've got three scientific talks, and first up, I'll introduce everybody. I'm Lynn with the Lemur Conservation Network, and we'll have Stephanie Canington from Johns Hopkins University talking about wild lemurs in America. And then Nicola Guthrie from University of Calgary is going to be talking about the non-forest habitats of the jollyae mouse lemur. And then third, we have Chell from the University of Toronto talking about the impact of habitat change on the Coquerel Sifaka. So welcome, Stephanie, Coral, and Nicola. Thanks so much for coming. So first up, Stephanie, do you want to kick us off?
All right. My talk is Wild Lemurs in America, the use of semi-captive and free-ranging lemurs for behavioral and ecological research. Next slide. I study captive lemurs. Everyone has their own understanding of what a captive habitat looks like. A definition I like to use is that captivity is a human-maintained habitat outside of the animal's natural range, with provisioned feeding and veterinary care. These habitats can be subdivided into those with gated boundaries, where non-natural barriers restrict the free travel of animals, and those without man-made barriers. In this first group are traditional zoo animals and semi-captive populations, like at the Lemur Conservation Foundation in Florida and the Duke Lemur Center in North Carolina. Those without boundaries are truly free-ranging animals, like on St. Catherine's Island, where the only boundary is water. Next slide. The Duke Lemur Center is a world-renowned research facility in Durham, North Carolina. When it was established, it was meant to be an effective second line of defense against extinction through captive breeding efforts. There are 14 species there currently, with the nocturnal lemurs remaining inside and the rest having access during the warmer parts of the year to gated sections of the Durham forest. These natural habitat enclosures, called NHEs, house mixed species small family units, so parents and offspring. Researchers and visitors can watch these lemurs travel and forage throughout the forests. Next slide. The majority of my research with living ring-tailed lemurs is on St. Catherine's Island. And it's funny because it kind of looks like Madagascar a little bit. It's a privately owned barrier island off the coast of Savannah, Georgia, where a great deal of animal conservation work has taken place for decades. Ring-tailed lemurs were brought here in 1985 from the Bronx Zoo as a way of testing the ability of captive-born lemurs to adapt to wild-like conditions, with the hope of one day reintroducing lemurs back to Madagascar. More lemurs were brought over from American zoos until the island reached a capacity of 93 individuals, which lived within 6 distinct groups called troops. There are only around 30 left today, with many having moved into zoos. My research project documented their feeding ecology during the fall and winter seasons. I followed 18 focal animals for all-day collection trips. Next slide. On Madagascar, ring-tailed lemurs can be found in the southern portion of the island. This map here shows current ranges in orange and possibly extinct ranges in red. They live in many different habitat types and eat a wide variety of plant foods. They travel during the day, called day ranges, in search of food, and with different troops having different territories to their name. Next slide. On St. Catherine's Island, the lemurs are provisioned with one formulated meal each day, typically given in the morning. Each lemur receives his or her own bowl filled with primate chow, fruit, and vegetables. Fruits are the high-yield, high-quality, and highly desired and coveted food items. Grapes in particular are the first to go. Because females have feeding priority and would otherwise hoard the best fruit, they each get their own feeding dish placed on top of feeding platforms. When food falls on the ground, raccoons and deer are often not too far behind to clean up the mess. During both the fall and winter seasons, the lemurs spend more time feeding on this provisioned food than they do feeding on the items they forage in the forest. Next slide. Forage diets. The lemurs on the island feed on the plant parts from at least 52 different species, including leaves, berries, pine cones, acorns, tree bark, and weeds. In addition to recording the types of plants they fed on and the specific behaviors they used during feeding, I recorded where exactly they were eating. On these plots, I have the names of the focal animals on the x-axis, and on the y-axis is the percentage of the time that the animals spent feeding on a certain substrate. And these included enclosure, on the ground, or in a tree. During the fall season, all but 2 lemurs, Laurel and Charlie Brown, forage entirely in the trees. During the winter, more of them were also feeding on items in the ground. This difference reflects the kinds of food they were eating. During the fall, there were berries to feed from in the trees. And in the winter, well, if you're gonna just eat leaves, why climb some trees when you can eat them on the ground anyway? Next slide. And finally, I used a GPS to track day ranges for my focal animals. I wanted to know if there were differences in how far they traveled in the fall versus the winter seasons. In the wild, there are differences in travel lengths between the dry and the wet season. And this has to do with food availability. So in the wet season, you have a lot of fruiting trees in close proximity, so there's no need to, spend all your day traveling. I found no statistically significant difference in this measure, either between males and females or between the seasons. It could be the case that following the lemurs in the spring would yield differences as more highly desired food items become available. Next slide. By allowing captive-born animals to live in natural, though controlled habitats, we can test what it would look like for them to live in the wild. Do they look out for predators? Do they avoid toxic food? And are they skilled in the trees? Next slide. There may come a time when many species become extinct in the wild, surviving only through captive breeding and conservation programs. Therefore, we must learn all we can about how well they adapt to human-modified spaces, and if they have lost or retained behaviors critical to their survival in the wild. And next slide. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Stephanie. That was really interesting. And if anybody in the audience has questions for Stephanie, you can put them in the Facebook comments and Stephanie will come in and answer questions. And also you can find her on Twitter at @Canington and reach out there and have any conversations you want to have about the ring-tailed lemurs on St. Catherine's Island or any other questions you have. So I'm wondering, Stephanie, it's pretty cool that you've been able to see ring-tailed lemurs like living in the wild in St. Catherine's Island. Are ring-tailed lemurs your favorite species, or do you have other species that you love too in the lemur family?
Oh yeah, they're definitely my favorite species, and I have a favorite animal too, and his name is Randy, and he's at the Duke Lemur Center. So shout out to Randy.
Awesome. What's so awesome about Randy?
He's super chill.
Yeah.
Very chill.
Cool. Well, thank you so much, Stephanie. And nice to see your little one. So up next, we have Nicola Guthrie. She's a PhD candidate from the Department of Anthropology and Archaeology at the University of Calgary. And Nicola is going to be discussing the Jolly's mouse lemur, which I'm super excited to hear about.
Thanks, Lynn. So I'm discussing today where does the Jolly's mouse lemur inhabit, outside of the forest specifically. Next slide, please. So mouse lemurs are one of the smallest primates in the world, and they're only found in Madagascar. And as you can see from this graph, which color is slightly different than on mine, that there's 24 species and many of them are threatened with extinction, unfortunately. There are many of the species, so it's currently 24, there's many of them that haven't been studied before or haven't had behavioral studies done before. So any budding lemur scientists out there who want to study a species that's brand new, you should look them up. Next slide, please. So mouse lemurs are found throughout Madagascar and they live in a variety of habitats, some in pristine rainforests, in the dry forest, spiny forests, and in the littoral forest. They're also found in degraded habitats as well. Some of the species here have broad distributions and others, such as the one I study, have more restricted ranges. Unfortunately, the species with more restricted ranges tend to be more endangered, which makes sense if you're only found in a small area and the habitat's destroyed by a really bad cyclone or ongoing fires or deforestation, and then the species are more likely to go extinct. Next slide. This came to light specifically in a recent paper that was published this year, where Madame Berth's lemur, which is the actual smallest primate in the world at only 30 grams, wasn't found in an ongoing research field site. So the research has been going on for decades, and unfortunately, since I think it was 2018, they hadn't caught any of the mouse lemurs. So they were worried they were gone extinct. But recently, there was an update that said that they actually had done a wider survey from their field station and had found some, which is really great news. Next slide, please. So my study species is the Jolly's mouse lemur, and it's only found in the commune of Canington, which is in the southeastern Madagascar. Next slide, please. So they were first described by Ed Lewis in 2006 and have remained unstudied since then. So my PhD research is the first time any behavioral study has been done on them. And they're currently classified as endangered. They are nocturnal, as all mouse lemurs are, and are omnivorous. Next slide, please. So one of the parts of my research was to determine where Jolly's mouse lemur are found outside of the forest and what factors might influence this. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, that they're only found in Canington. So in this map, this is the Canington area, a very small area, and the dark green that you can see there is the forest fragments that are remaining. This used to all be forested. It's described as degraded lowland humid forest, and there are currently 9 species of lemurs found there, including 2 critically endangered species, the black and white ruffed lemur and the greater bamboo lemur. Next slide, please. So in between all the forest fragments, there's a mosaic of landscapes. And it's all very patchy. So you can see this forest in this photo. There is, this is a part of Canington, and you can see there are rice fields down in the valley. On top of the hills, there's grassland. There's also tree fallow, which tends to be abandoned land that's going between agricultural cycles. The dominant species found there are usually bamboo or ravenala. And these can be clear cut in order to plant other crops. There's also established plantations, and these tend to be fruit trees that have been planted years ago, and people just harvest the fruit on their land, but the trees remain there all the time. They've been planted sometimes up to like 20, 30 years ago. So to the right of this photo is actually one of the forest fragments. So what we were wanting to know is, are the Jolly's mouse lemurs venturing outside of the forest and using these other habitats? Next slide, please. We also really wanted to know whether they're using any of the reforestation areas. So the organization we work with in Canington, the Madagascar Biodiversity Partnership, one of their main goals is to restore a lot of the forest that has been lost and reconnect the forest fragments. From this map, you can see that the yellow is where all the reforestation has happened up until 2019. And they've planted over 5 million trees now, which is great. Next slide, please. So I went out to Madagascar, to Canington in April 2018 to July 2019, and we had transects that went through the different types of habitats from the forest into the reforestation and then tree fallows and grassland, things like that. What we did was we had a transect that was 300 meters long, and we would put a Sherman trap, which you can see I'm setting in this photo, and we'd have a little slice of banana inside that would entice the mouse lemur in, and then that would close. They remain unharmed, and then we collect the traps at night, and we do some measurements. Next slide, please. So we collected the morphometric measurements and some biological samples. We would do this in order to tell how healthy the species are and make sure that we are collecting as much data as we can by hand from handling them. Yeah, we tended to use our red light in order to reduce the stress of the animal as well, except for ID photos and looking for parasites. Next slide, please. We would use, so a lot of the mouse lemurs, you need to know whether you've captured multiple ones over different nights. So we'd shave a little bit of the fur on their tail and then color in with animal safe color markers and give them all individual fancy haircuts. And then we would release them back where they were found. The whole process of them being handled usually takes 10 minutes. And we wanted to reduce the stress on the animal as much as possible. I do want to make it very clear that this was all done by highly trained individuals, and our project does have ethical approval with permits. So although you see a lot of photos of the animals being handled, this was for scientific research, and these animals do not make good pets. As you can see, we have nice thick gloves on because they do tend to like to bite you. Next slide, please. So for our results, we had 5,148 trap nights. So that's just the number of traps we put out times the number of nights. And we caught 52 individuals over 18 transects. So the transects that we captured the mouse lemurs on, there was 8% of our forest transects we caught them on, 15% of our established plantation, over 26% of our tree fallow transects, and 15% of grassland and 25% of reforestation transects. So the results show that they are relying more on other habitats and not only in the forest. I was quite surprised to begin with about the number of transects that it's quite low for the forest. But this was partly explained by when we trapped in Batuvavi, we didn't trap anything, which was quite surprising. We did see them a couple of times on camera traps and a few times when we were walking through the forest, but didn't capture any. This could possibly be because the forest that remains is at a higher elevation than a lot of the other treed habitat types, such as tree fallow and the reforestation and established plantation. They tend to be a little bit lower, and elevation is actually something that does dictate where mouse lemurs can be found. So that's possibly one of the reasons that Batuvavi is slightly higher and we didn't find them. What we did find was when we were walking out of the forest and down towards the road, slightly lower elevation, that we often saw them near the road as well. This could possibly be because there's more food availability there. There could be more insects in slightly more open areas. Next slide, please. So yeah, in conclusion, Jolly's mouse lemur occupies a variety of different land cover types, but surprisingly found less so in the forest than we would expect. We are going to continue to look at factors such as the vegetation structure and the tree species diversity to see the different types of land cover, how these different types of land cover might affect where they're found. We are hoping to have discussions with the landowners of the established plantations and the abandoned tree fallows in order to help protect the species. Hopefully, future work would look at the health of Jolly's mouse lemurs to see if inside the forest versus outside the forest they're adversely affected in any way. But hopefully, this is a kind of good sign for the species that's only found in such a small area, that if there are large deforestation from fires, and there was a terrible cyclone earlier this year too, actually, that destroyed a lot of the forest. So hopefully it shows that even if the forest does get smaller, that they are able to be found in other areas and survive. Next slide. And yeah, I just want to thank all of these wonderful people that helped me with this. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That's really fascinating, and it's interesting because I've been to Kianjavatu to visit MBP's field station. So I'm curious, when you were doing the transects for the Jolly's mouse lemur, did you see, you said there was 9 species of lemur that live in the area. Were you seeing the other species while you were doing the transects, or they were sort of harder to find, you had to look for them sort of intentionally?
Yeah, we often saw them. So we'd put the traps out during the afternoon, and then you would come across Varesia, like the black and white rough lemur, sometimes the bamboo lemurs as well. At night, I was very lucky to see an eye. Usually you only see them when you go out with the guides because they're radio collared. But I was waiting for my guides to come back with the traps, and I could hear some rustling in a bush, and I went and looked, and there was an eye, and it was incredible. So yeah, we did actually get to see, I think I saw every single species when we were out doing the transect, so it was really exciting.
That's awesome. Was there any, you mentioned the eye, is there any species other than the Jolly's mouse lemur in the area that, you're particularly fond of?
I do love the eye. I feel like it gets a lot of flack. People say it's ugly. I think it's cute. The adaptations I have are just remarkable. Following them and seeing them in the wild is just like truly a once in a lifetime experience, or I guess depending how many times you're out there, multiple time experience. But yeah.
And it's awesome you saw it without even having to rely on the radio color. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, it was really awesome.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, Coral. So our next guest is Coquerel Chell, from a PhD student from the University of Toronto. And she's going to be talking about the Coquerel Sifaka, which is the first species of lemur I saw in the wild. So I'm super excited to hear about Coral's research. Take it away.
Awesome. Thank you, Lynn. Yeah, so my talk is based around my PhD research, which I'm in sort of the first few stages of it, looking at the impact of habitat change on both the behaviour and the physiology of the Coquerel Sifaka. Next slide, please. So firstly, I wanted to introduce this idea of habitat change. So globally, about 60% of primates are threatened with extinction. And then if we look more specifically at Madagascar, around 98% of lemurs are threatened with extinction. And most of the threats that we see that all of these primates, including lemurs, are facing is to do with anthropogenic habitat change. And that's mainly because of their high dependency on their forest ecosystems. And when I say anthropogenic, I mean sort of human-induced change. And by that, it's usually anything from forest conversion or primary forest conversion for crops, cattle pastures, tree plantations, and mining. Those are the key things that we see within Madagascar. However, it is reflected in other parts of the world as well. And all of those sort of changes that we see end up leading to things like forest loss, forest degradation, and forest and habitat fragmentation, which, even though they're three separate things, they are extremely interlinked, and one tends to mean or lead to the other and vice versa. And the reason why this sort of change is usually seen as bad or negative is because it changes not only the sort of habitat structure and the vegetation structure in the forest, but it also changes resource, so like food, availability and quality, as well as things like introducing disease, introducing invasive species potentially into the area, and increasing hunting pressure on these species. Next slide, please. The other thing that I wanted to introduce that's kind of really important to my research is the field of endocrinology. So endocrinology is the study of hormones and the endocrine glands and organs. And more specifically, I do field endocrinology. So I take all of these methods of endocrinology that we use in a lab setting and I take them into the field. So here in this picture is my little field lab with all of my equipment. And the idea is that we can take all of the methods that we have for the lab, but we can apply it to these free living wild populations of not only primates and lemurs, but pretty much any other species as well. And being able to do this allows us to ask a lot more sort of in-depth questions. And it allows us to ask these questions that we can't usually sort of approach with captive or even sort of free-ranging populations like the ones that Stephanie was talking about earlier. And there's a lot of different approaches to endocrinology, but mainly we're looking at exploring growth, stress levels, and reproductive status. And ultimately, it allows us to look at how both individuals and populations are dealing currently in and how they're sort of coping with change. But also we can then look at how they might potentially respond in the future to different changes, like the changes that we see when we've got change in habitat. And we can take all of the methods that we use, looking at blood, saliva, feces, urine, hair, and even feathers, and we can take it into the field with us. Next slide, please. So the way that this links into my work is I look at stress, and stress is a very complicated term, and it is used to mean two different things. One of which is for the environmental change, so the stressor, but then it also can be used as a term for the response as well. So it can be used on both sides. But for me, I use it for the physiological response. So I look at physiological stress, and that sort of is, it is the proper definition is the multidimensional physiological response to both predictable and unpredictable environmental stimuli. But essentially, it's just looking at all of those physiological responses to both predictable and unpredictable events. And I specifically look at glucocorticoids, or cortisol, we know it more as. And that's a steroid hormone that's found in all vertebrate species, so anything with a backbone. And it is the most common measure of physiological stress. So we use it in humans, but we also use it in primates and in lemurs. Next slide, please. So that takes me then to my work, which my overall aim is that I want to use a combination of both behavioural and physiological approaches to try and quantify this relationship between habitat change, anthropogenic and human stresses, behaviour, energy usage, and this physiological stress. Next slide, please. And I do that on also my favourite species, the Coquerel Sifaka. So they're found in the northwest of the island. So on here you can see a map of their distribution. So anything that is within sort of the orange is where they're found. And then the blue star is specifically where I work, which I'll talk about in a minute. But the Coquerel Sifaka, unfortunately, is critically endangered, and that was as of 2020, and when there was a new red list assessment of them, and that's now all Sifaka species, so all 9 species are now classed as critically endangered. They're diurnal, so they're active during the day, which there isn't actually many lemur species that are now truly just active during the day. A lot of them are ephemeral, and they're active both during the day and night, whereas these guys are strictly diurnal. They're also seasonal folivores, which means that they do eat leaves. However, it does highly depend on the season. And you will find that when resources, so like fruit availability is higher, that they might switch their diet to eating more fruit than leaves. They're also classed as sort of ecologically flexible. So they have been found in sort of different habitats other than forests. So they have been found, and I've seen them in sort of villages, non-forest habitats, mangroves, things like that. And they do tend to, or we get the impression that they're coping a lot better with sort of environmental change than maybe other species. And they're also potentially edge tolerant. But by that, I mean that when a habitat, when a forest is sort of cut off into different fragments, you'll have some species that will occupy only the center of the fragment. Then you'll have other species that might also occupy the edge of that fragment as well. And in some of the distribution for this species, they are found on the edge, and even so far out of the edge that they're in completely non-forest habitat, whereas in other areas of their distribution, they're only found in the center of the forest and not on the edge. So we're not really sure 100% what's going on with them. So that's why there's a couple of question marks there with that. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, I work obviously in the northwest of the island where the species is found, but more specifically, I work in the Marirano region, or the Marirano Forest Complex, which is a little forest complex that's found about 40 kilometres from Majanga, which is the nearest city. And it's an area that's managed by VOI, so a local organisation, but there's also various other forest fragments around it, which are managed by other VOIs. But I specifically work in sort of the Marirano forest. And funnily enough, there's also 9 species of lemur found in this forest as well, ranging from, we've got the Coquerel Sifaka, there's mongoose lemur, the brown lemurs, there's like 3 different species of mouse lemur. Sadly, we don't have aye-ayes, but we do have like sportive lemurs and avahis as well, which is pretty cool. Next slide, please. So in terms of my data collection, as I mentioned, I'm trying to use several different approaches to answer my sort of question and within my research. So that means that I'm using multiple different methods. So I've got sort of three main methods that I'm doing. I've got behavioural observations. So I perform full day follows. So I get up before the sun's up. I go and meet my group at around about 6 a.m. in the morning, wait for them to wake up. I then follow them all the way throughout the day until they go to bed at night, which is usually around sort of 5:30, 6 o'clock again in the evening. And I follow different groups in different areas of the forest, and I'm collecting data on their general sort of activity budget. So how long are they feeding? How long are they moving? I'm looking at their social behaviours, so like grooming and aggression, looking at their stress behaviours, and I'm also doing home range analysis to see how far different individuals and different groups will range within the forest. Alongside all of that, I'm also collecting their poo, because my work is totally non-invasive, so I don't handle any of the animals. I purely just do observational stuff and collect samples off the forest floor. So before 12 p.m. every day, I will try and collect as many individuals' poo samples as I can, with an aim of hopefully being able to assess that cortisol level in both individuals and for the groups as a whole, so I can compare the groups. And then the third thing I'm doing, which is quite different, is interviews. So as I mentioned, we've got the VOI, so the local organisation that helps manage the forest. And with them, they've also got, there's loads of other little villages, small pockets of villages, some of which only have, say, 2 houses, and then others that are a little bit larger. And my aim is to go to all of these different little village pockets that are around the forest complex. And I want to interview household heads to try and understand how they're using the forest and how they're using that area. And that's kind of split into 2. So I look at both hunting and consumption mainly of forest species. Then I also look at forest resource use. So I want to know how much timber are they taking from the forest and how are they using it and where are they getting it from? And hopefully I can pull that all together to build sort of a bigger picture. Next slide, please. So, as I said, I'm still only in the first stages of my work, and the other 2 speakers are lucky enough that they're kind of at the end of their PhD and they've got a lot of sort of results and data to talk about. However, for me, I've only just come back from a pilot study this summer, so I've still got my big sort of 2 6-month-long field seasons to go. However, I have managed to get sort of a little bit this summer to be able to talk about. So this summer I went out to Madagascar to Mariorano for 3 months. So from June to August, which is during the dry season within Madagascar. And my aim for this whole 3-month period was to test my methods and to make sure that they sort of worked and if there was anything that needed changing. I wanted to check the general feasibility of my study. You know, can I actually do it in this area, or do I need to consider like swapping species or swapping areas? And then the most important thing was I wanted to build relationships with people. So I'm going into a community and I'm asking them to, if I can live in their community, I can work, I can research, I can talk to individuals that live there. So it's really important that I built up relationships with both the people in the village, the people surrounding the village, but then also just in the country in general. And I'd like to say that I managed to do all 3 of those things. Next slide, please. So I've still got a lot of data from this that I need to analyse and to actually do stuff with. But as sort of overall, some of the things that I found was for the total time that we were there, we saw 43 independent groups of the Sifaka. And so in this map here, you can see the little blue dots are the groups that we found. However, that's only a small portion of the forest as a whole. So the whole sort of beige yellow bit is the whole of the Mariorano forest complex. So I didn't even go onto the other part of the forest. So there's still a lot of that area that could have multiple groups within it. However, you can see already that there's a lot of individuals and a lot of groups in that area. I also, funnily enough, collected 43 fecal samples as well. That wasn't one sample per group. There was often, for some groups, there was multiple samples from multiple individuals, but they're currently in Madagascar and I'm hoping to get them shipped to the US soon to start to do some analysis. I also completed 16 full day follows on 4 different groups. So for about anywhere from 3 to 5 days for each group, I followed them consecutively and collected data from them. And then we also conducted 85 interviews with households across 17 separate villages within the region. So there's a lot of different villages across this area. And that's because, like I said, some of them are 2 households, some of them are like 30. So there ends up being a lot of them. Next slide, please. The one thing that I really wanted to highlight was the fact that we saw these groups and individuals in all different habitat types. Even though at the very beginning I said that primates have this really high dependency on forest ecosystems, as proven by both my work and Nicola's as well, these animals are found in loads of different habitats, not just forests. And for me, as soon as I got to my site, this photo on the left, we had one of the groups of the Sifakas waiting in the camp to see what we were doing and to say hello. And then the one on the far right, that is me sat in my hammock on about a day or 2 before I left my site, with the same group coming back to see me and to want to know sort of what I'm doing. And they would consistently come into our camp sort of every day. And there was usually 2 groups that would come by, but there was this group in particular with 3 individuals that would consistently come back at the same sort of times every day. And then the photo in the middle, which I know isn't as easy to see, but there is a Sifaka in the tree there, and that's above someone's house in the village. So as soon as you walk through the village, you will find Sifaka groups, and they are very used to living sort of next to people. And even on busy days, market days, when it's loud and there's a lot of people around, they will still be just going about their day, eating their mango fruit, eating the jackfruits, and just loving their life. Next slide, please. So for me, the biggest thing, the same as for Nicola, is that this wouldn't happen if it wasn't for all of these people here. I am one little person in a really big project that involves a lot of different help. So I've got people in country, in Madagascar, that helped me, including just my guides or my camp staff for making sure that I could eat properly every day, and my research assistants as well, which without them, half of that data wouldn't have been collected. And then there's also all of the people back home in Canada, so my supervisor and my team, and also Stacey Teacott as well, who I'm doing my analysis with for my fecal samples, and my university. So without them, it wouldn't happen.
Awesome, Coral. That's really cool to hear about and to like see photos of the Sifakas like in the village and that they were coming to visit you, check up on you. That's awesome. Sounds like a dream. So just like with Stephanie and Nicola, you can ask Coral questions either in the chat in the comments on the Facebook video or on Twitter. Reach out to her, and if you have any follow-up questions or just want to learn more about Coral's work. So Coral, I'm curious, you know, we've had 3 awesome talks today from scientists, and you know, if somebody in the audience is inspired and wants to either study lemurs or just learn more about lemurs and kind of find the next, you know, interesting tidbit about lemurs that they want to dive into, do you have any ideas for how people can get started to learn more?
Yeah, so there's this common misconception, I think, that you need to go to Madagascar to learn about them and to help. And actually, you can do it right from home. So you can go to zoos, go to accredited zoos where they have captive populations of lemurs, and usually you can go and talk to keepers, or you can just go and see them. But you can also just do it from your computer. So particularly for Lemur Conservation Network, we've got loads of resources to help people learn about lemurs. But then there's also just ask questions. If you see a researcher or a conservationist that you're really inspired by what they do, reach out to them, because we all love talking about lemurs and we all love talking about our work. So just ask us a question, and most likely you'll get a much longer response than you actually wanted, because we just can't stop talking. So you don't have to go all the way to Madagascar to help or to learn. You can just do it from home, or you can do it going to a zoo or anything like that.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think people that are in lemur conservation or studying lemurs are always I'm always open to talking about Madagascar and lemurs and stuff, and I feel like
Mhm.
people are pretty open and happy to help and talk to people. So that's great advice. Well, thanks everybody. Thanks to the three of you and also to everybody listening. I hope everybody was inspired to learn about not only, you know, a little more about the lemurs, but also the research approaches and the methods and the field sites and everything. I always think that's super interesting to learn about. So it's a great way for us all to celebrate World Lemur Day. And yeah, so everybody, I hope you all have a fantastic World Lemur Day. Check out our website at lemurconservationnetwork.org to learn how you can help lemurs, learn more about lemurs, and yeah, and follow our amazing scientists on Twitter so you can learn more about their work when they have updates. And that's all we've got. So thank you guys again, and happy World Lemur Day. Bye.